Hello and welcome. I'm Adrian Sinabra. You might know me as the host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast, but today I'm here to host another installment of SC Media's In Focus. These interviews feature some of the top thought leaders in the cybersecurity space. This is an opportunity for these experts to share hindsight on recent events and foresight on where you should be focused as a cybersecurity professional in the near future. Today, we're discussing findings from Fortinet's 2024 State of Operational Technology and Cybersecurity Report. We will be discussing notable changes since last year's report. I think this is the sixth one in the series, if I'm not incorrect there.
That's right.
Uh, yeah, why OT has become a hot target for cyber criminals, new attack vectors, particularly against Linux servers and workloads, ransomware attacks becoming more destructive, stopping criminals faster through a deeper understanding of attack techniques. Joining me today is Richard Springer, the Director of Marketing for OT Solutions at Fortinet. Richard, excited to be talking to you on this topic today.
Yeah, likewise, Adrian. Excited to be here. And yeah, this is an exciting space, no doubt.
Yeah, a lot of focus on OT today and kind of an uncomfortable focus as, it seems like the ransomware groups have realized that they can create some urgency to pay a ransom if they go after operational systems. If
Mhm.
they understand how a business's operations work and then go after those operations, a lot of time that means OT systems, it seems.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've seen this with our research as we track OT threats globally through our Fortinet customers and the intel that we gather. And there definitely has been a pivoting towards manufacturing. And this is really that evolution of seeing these events play out in front of us. And even with the SEC reporting rules now in place, now you have to declare or announce a cyber material event. And so we're getting more educated.
Mm.
And with that, the bad actors, unfortunately, are leveraging that. In times past, they would be relatively blind to the networks that they were in. They were just in there to, encrypt the networks and the computers and look for data and intellectual property. Now they're understanding that, oh, I'm in a factory or I'm in critical infrastructure. And now they're starting to monetize that interruption or that stoppage. And that goes into their ransom calculus. So yeah, it is a riper target, whereas before, again, they were a little bit more generic about where they were attacking.
Yeah, and you mentioned the SEC requirements. Now they've become snitches on their targets. We've seen a couple of cases where they say, "Hey, we hacked them. They haven't reported yet. Go after
Right,
them, SEC."
right. Yeah, I mean, it is a bizarre world out there with
So weird.
ransoms, right? But yeah, anyway, from the OT standpoint, I mean, that is the biggest news is that shift. And not only is it just a shift in manufacturing because of the ransom piece of it, but there's the supply chain implications is there as well. We also have, the Ukraine-Russian war going on. So there's a lot of activity in EMEA. And so there are geopolitical events that compound this as well. But yeah, there definitely is a huge uptick on with activities and what we're seeing with ransomware and malware in the manufacturing space.
So as I mentioned in the intro, most of my background is from the enterprise side is financial services.
Mhm.
So I never really touched OT very much. But after 6 years of doing this report, I would imagine some trends, some insights have kind of popped out to you.
Yeah, certainly. And so going back 6 years, and that is where I came from the operational space into cybersecurity. So I've been part of this evolution. The thing that stands out the most is really the validation and elevation of OT risk associated with cybersecurity events. In times past, it wasn't a priority. And even then, physically, a lot of these assets were air-gapped. They just weren't connected. So it was not even a consideration. I mean, certainly there were some customers who were taking security seriously back then, but majority of them just, it wasn't a priority. So what's gone on with digital transformation or Industry 4.0 is that we are rapidly connecting these assets, the factories and what have you, and we're digitizing them and we're using AI and ML, machine learning models in order to optimize production. And so when we do that, we're connected. And then you can throw IoT in there as well, this exponential climb of those devices that need a cloud connection. So a few years ago, we had an air gap factory. Now we're fully connected. Um, and so with that, we, again, are witnessing these events. We just talked about the ransomware piece of it. We're talking about the SEC rulings. And so this risk is now percolating up the organization. And now we're seeing the C-suite really embrace it. And so that OT risk is now in the top 3, in the top 5. The C-suite is looking around at who's responsible. Typically, it's the CISO. And so we've seen that emerge year over year. And then with the 2024 report, we're actually we see the increase with the CISO again, but then we're also seeing the COO or the CTO or the CIO also getting that. So the whole C-suite is being elevated with the CISO being the primary person responsible for OT risk that's now like I said, at the top of the list.
Yeah. So since you mentioned the people piece of this or responsibility, that was one of the interesting things about the report that popped out to me was that there has been a shift in who's ultimately responsible for OT security in the organization, which, I remember even when I was in financial services, there was a complete disconnect between the facilities folks that ran our data centers, which was as close as we got to OT. They had batteries and diesel generators and HVAC systems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And of course, those were the systems where, we had Windows running as admin with a blank password.
Sure.
But yeah, it seems like that's seen a big shift in who's ultimately responsible for security on the OT side.
Yeah. And so that, again, it's this awareness of risk and being able to better assess it. And then again, looking at events around the world and seeing, okay, again, the production stoppage and so forth. So again, all these go into typical corporate risk, assessments. So now we bring in the new players, which is, largely the IT teams. And so that goes to personas, right? So the previous persona may have been that plant manager who had very limited budget, probably limited resources, trying to do some sort of security in what may have been an air gap type of environment, right? So it's very rudimentary to very, basic type of things. So then as we have evolved into the C-suite, well, now the CISO or the CIO are bringing their IT resources to bear, being budget and trained operators, and they're coming into the OT space. And so that's a shift in persona. And with that are the teams. So now you have IT teams and you have the OT teams. And we know based on our interaction with customers and just, again, from the data gathered is that, they're still trying to figure out how to work together. And this is a key point for anybody who's trying to do this, is that you really do need to find common ground. This isn't IT coming in and taking over. This isn't OT standing in there with their arms folded saying we're not going to do it. It's trying to find middle ground. And quite honestly, it can be something as simple as patching, which is unique in the OT space, which is very difficult. But if we can actually get in there and do that, or we can do some compensating controls around our vulnerable OT devices, which may be 10, 20, sometimes 30 years old. This is production reliability, right? So a little bit of security coming in that space goes a long way. And then there are benefits to the operational aspect as well. So that's where we need to find that win-win when we've got these mixed teams with the same common goal of keeping the lights on, keeping the production running, and keeping the company healthy and competitive.
And it seems more and more like the market's responded to that in terms of products with OT specific features and products now, that take advantage or not take advantage, but take into account, the special needs of those environments.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the difference between IT and OT, is that the factory is a mix of, servers and what have you, and think of it as the upper ring of offices in the factory looking down on the floor. But as you get down on the floor, you get into the OT networks, and in those OT networks, you have specialized devices, and they also talk a special communications or protocols. And so you need OT designed solutions to be able to work optimally down in that space. If not, then they're just kind of blind to it and they're just looking at those servers up above. So that's the biggest difference there, is that you need OT dedicated solutions that can work with those devices and protocols in order to provide the best security. If not, you'll be relatively blind to that. So it really is a converged world in there. But yeah, I mean, you really have to be able to see from a visibility standpoint. You have to understand the network, and then you are able to apply appropriate security measures to provide security. Yep.
And the threats against OT here, is this largely the same we're seeing in enterprises without OT stuff, or is the focus on OT because they're kind of laggards in terms of security technology and controls and things like that, and just marking them as the lowest hanging fruit in some cases?
Yeah, there are really two different types of threats. And so the first one and the most common one is the traditional, IT threat, if you call it that, or ransomware. Um, so these are, either the access is through the IT network to the OT space, but these are ransom events. And what we see here is that the ransom events affect operational systems or business processes that could lead to a production stoppage or interruption. And we've seen this historically. So this is like an indirect impact into the OT space, that the line stopped because there was a ransom event that occurred maybe inside that factory network. That's the first one. The second one is OT specific malware. This OT specific malware is not as common, and it is targeting those robot arms and conveyor belts and the devices that operate them. And this is largely nation state level activity. So it's very complicated, very precise, very resource intensive. And so that's why you see, the nation states behind that in order to do that focused type of operation. And so these are coming, we're seeing more bad actors in this space as well. We had the Volt Typhoon
Hmm.
announcement recently. We saw some attacks here in the stateside with the water districts as well. So there are a handful of, a smaller set of this OT specific malware on top
Right.
of the traditional ransomware. So it's really a twofold challenge in the industrial spaces.
Well, one of the interesting things that I noted from the report here was that there's a significant decrease in organizations reporting 100% visibility of OT activities. And I loved it because the insight here is that maybe they're just getting better at asset discovery and identification, and like the loss of naivete is what's maybe resulting in this decrease in confidence that they've got 100% of what's going on.
Mhm.
So, so obviously discovering those blind spots is important, because if the attackers find them and you don't know about them,
That's right.
that's why we have markets like external attack surface management. There's a lot of products for that these days. And before the pandemic, usually when I'd heard about OT was when somebody found a water treatment plant or a brewery on Shodan,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
VNC or something like that. You see this screenshot of like a boiler or something like
Yep.
that, and the different pressures and temperatures and things like that.
That's
But
right.
what are some of the biggest challenges for OT organizations in modernizing these environments? Because obviously discovery is just the first piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, again, we talked about 6 years ago with, the air gap factories or security not as a priority. And so over that time, we're talking about most are engaging in the basic solutions, like you mentioned, visibility. So it may have been a three-ring binder as an as-built 10 years ago as a starting point. And so now we're bringing in, sensors and we're doing deep packet inspection on these networks in order to identify these assets. So visibility is with assets, and with that are vulnerabilities that we understand. And that's also the network topology piece of it. And so these are the basic controls or solutions that are very much part of the conversation, right? I mean, the maturity bell curve is left leaning in the industrial space. And once we get to that point that we have some basic visibility, then the network piece of that comes into it. And so making those first connections, have a proper next generation firewall in order to route and block traffic sufficiently with some OT security services built into that. And then you work down into there with additional firewalls and switches in order to provide proper segmentation. Again, basic solutions that we know and love in the IT and enterprise world that just may not be there. There are a lot of flat networks in the OT space. Um, and so then we get into, okay, now we need to protect these OT devices, and maybe there aren't patches for these vulnerable devices. So that's where those compensating controls come in, microsegmentation, virtual patching, deception. There's a lot of different things that we can do from a network security standpoint where we wait to get those things proper, those devices properly patched. So then once you get the core of those from a secure networking standpoint, then you can start bringing in aspects of zero trust, and then you can go into the OT security operations piece or OT SecOps. And again, here you're dealing with security professionals with tools that are built for those OT spaces to get down to that device level. So there really is a large maturity curve here, and most are at the beginning, making that initial connection and going to the segmentation piece.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one of the things what you're just going through there that I love about the Fortinet reports is that you actually have some best practices, some recommendations that people can do right away, which you've just mentioned there. So yeah, highly recommend taking a look at the report. I really enjoy your reports. It's easy to get to the highlights very quickly and understand what you found here.
Mhm.
And with that, we've been talking to Richard Springer from Fortinet. Thank you, Richard, for joining me today.
Likewise, Adrian, really appreciate it. Enjoyed talking with you.
And for everyone listening, thank you for being in focus with us today.